The Modi government today reduced the price of LPG cylinders by 200 rupees. So cylinders which cost 1100 rupees will now only cost 900. And for those who are eligible under the Ujjwala scheme, there's a further reduction of another 200 rupees. So which means if you are one of the 10 crore beneficiaries under the Ujjwala scheme, you will now pay only 700 rupees per cylinder as opposed to the 1100 rupees that it is currently in the market. Now, the opposition is saying that this betrays a sense of nervousness because the ruling BJP got a big jolt in the Karnataka election results, and there is also, of course, the upcoming state elections to Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. So the question then that's being asked is this a pragmatic move with an eye on the polls, or does it, as the opposition claims, signal a sign of nervousness?
Raksha Bandhan, and I think in the true spirit of this Tyohar, of this occasion, I think this is a gift that goes out from the government, from the Honorable Prime Minister personally to all the sisters.
हर रक्षाबंधन में राखी पर बहनों की अपेक्षा होती है कि भाई कोई सौगात देगा, कोई भेंट देगा अथवा शगुन देगा। तो आज देश की 33 करोड़ बहनों की ओर से विशेष प्रधानमंत्री जी का आभार, जो उन्होंने घरेलू गैस को सिलेंडर को 200 रुपये सस्ता किया।
अनुराग ठाकुर जी जानबूझ के प्रधानमंत्री जी को क्या बदनाम करने के लिए इस तरह का ऐलान कर रहे हैं? कम से कम प्रधानमंत्री को बता दें कि कांग्रेस शासित प्रदेश में जो है 500 रुपये मिल रहे हैं।
So let's take a look at what is it that the government has promised, what it has announced today, and how it compares for subsidy holders as well as non-subsidy holders. Now, for non-subsidy holders, the earlier price was 1103 rupees. That has now been reduced by 200 rupees per cylinder. So if you're a non-subsidy holder, then that means you have to pay 903 rupees as opposed to 1103 now in the market. Now, if you are a subsidy holder for Ujjwala beneficiaries, for example, the price that was earlier 903 will now be reduced by another further 200 rupees to just 703. So there's a 400 rupees difference almost between the current market rate and what Ujjwala holders will be paying from here on. Now, what may this mean as far as the poorer sections who are concerned? Remember, there are about 10 crore beneficiaries of Ujjwala. It's one of the central pillars of Prime Minister Modi's welfare agenda, the free LPG connections that were granted through this Ujjwala scheme. Now, it was rolled out back on the 1st of May 2016. Free LPG connections were initially rolled out to, I think, about 2 crore people. And then the scheme achieved 8 crore connections by the time it was September of 2019. And then, in the second phase, Ujjwala 2, which was launched post-2019, in that there was the provision of free refills. In case the cylinder ran out of gas, you would get one free refill, and also hot plates to try and avoid what was the old steam ovens or chulas as they were known. And then 1.6 crore connections were made under this phase 2 of Ujjwala. This is the latest data that is available for 31st of December 2022. Now, over 50% rise just in the period from 2014 to 2023, there has been a 50% rise in LPG coverage between April 2014 and 2023. So which means there's been a 1.5 times increase in that sense in the total number of people who had gas connections prior to 2014 and those who have it now. So what is the political impact of this move? Make no mistake, this is coming right on the heels of election season, as it were. Number one, the opposition is trying to corner the government on price rise and inflation. It will puncture a key poll plank of the opposition. Two, it also tackles public anger. Remember, the government had taken a beating. Certainly in the Karnataka election, this was a big issue, and this was something that they were worried about in the upcoming elections to the 3 North Indian states as well. So high LPG prices were causing damage to the government. Also, one big plank of the Modi government is its pro-poor welfare schemes. There too, with the differential of 400 rupees, Ujjwala scheme holders paying just 700 rupees for cylinders, that will help them protect that beneficiary class, the Labharti class. The Congress, remember, has been pushing for providing cylinder at 500 rupees. In Rajasthan, they claim they're already implementing that. And Kamal Nath is claiming that he will do this right away from day one if the Congress comes to power in Madhya Pradesh. So this will blunt that to a great extent. So, is this a political move? Is it a pragmatic move with one eye on the polls? Because this was becoming a bit of a pain point for lower middle classes, for poorer sections of society. Or is this, as the opposition is claiming, a sign of nervousness by the BJP government, by the Modi government? Syed Zafar Islam is national spokesperson of the BJP. Dr. Ajay Kumar is national spokesperson of the Congress Party. Bijon Mishra is a consumer policy expert. And Santosh Mehrotra is an economist with JNU. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Zafar Islam, let me start with you first. The opposition saying that they have been crying hoarse for the last couple of years now, asking your government to reduce the price of LPG from 1100. You finally, on the eve of elections, just when the whole country is gearing up for 2024, you've now suddenly reduced this by 200 rupees. The opposition is saying that this is a sign of nervousness.
Well, opposition has nothing else to speak. So they are taking refuge by saying this kind of statement, making this kind of statement, but they are far away from reality. Fact is that the Honorable Prime Minister has always stated and ensured that the marginalized section of the society is being taken care of by the government. All the welfare schemes is being run to ensure that the beneficiaries are the government, must get the support from the government, and that is something in every policy decision of the government. Today's decision, what the Honorable Prime Minister has taken, keeping in view of the sudden spike in the inflation purely because of the vegetable prices have gone up, the prices of rice have gone up, and prices of spices have gone up. So he has taken a policy decision on rice. He ensured that there is no export. He has banned export of rice to ensure that there is no price escalation as far as our rice is concerned. Then, of course, he has also
but Zafar, the same question that the opposition is asking is, the opposition is asking, they have been saying this for the better part of the last 2 years. The international oil prices have fallen. They're right now about $80 a barrel or so. But why are you not doing the same thing for petrol and diesel? Only people in India are paying 100 rupees for a litre of petrol. Why?
No, today also the decision has been taken purely because there is two very important festivals, the Rakhi festival and of course Onam festival. On this special occasion, the Honorable Prime Minister has announced 200 rupees for the normal people who have a connection, and those who are part of this Ujjwala scheme, they will get 400 rupees of subsidy. And this is purely as a gift from the Prime Minister to our sisters, and mothers and sisters of the country.
So Dr. Ajay Kumar, this is a gift by the Prime Minister, gift by the government. This is what the BJP is claiming. Whether it happens 5 months before an election or 1 year before the Lok Sabha election, how does that matter? The point is, you have been asking for it. Today the government has done it. It's reduced the price. Dr. Ajay Kumar.
So what's interesting is, like these evil companies, not all companies are evil, but those evil companies which raise the prices. So the Prime Minister and his government has been raising it from 2014 from 400 rupees to 1200 rupees, 1300 rupees, 1100 rupees. And then Mr. Zafar Islam comes on the TV and says, we are giving you a gift. The people of India are not so stupid to see their game through that here is a gentleman who's been increasing price 30 odd times, I believe. And he sell a product which should have been available in the market for 500, 450, 500, 600. They're selling for 1100, and then they have the arrogance to come on the TV even Mr. Anurag Thakur, and said, by the way, the Prime Minister is gifting. Oh my God, I mean, how is this Mr. Modi so kind of you? After robbing the people of India for 9 years, now Mr. Modi is, it's not relief, I am gifting. You see, look at their arrogance, that you robbed us for 9 years, and then you have the arrogance to say it. And by the way, the subsidy which they have increased, Zaka, 200 or more rupees for Ujjwala scheme, those 200 rupees were already there earlier. They have added 200 more.
Yeah.
But those people, 10%, approximately 10% didn't even have a single refill. 11% or took only one refill. And 56% took less than 4 to 3 refills. My question is, the Prime Minister and his government have seen the writing on the wall and they're trying to damage control the 5-state election. They've got no Raksha Bandhan in mind, no people in mind. The only thing these guys understand is when they're losing elections.
Dr. Ajay Kumar, no, one second. You know, since you said they've been looting the people 9 years, prices have been going up, so on and so forth. May I ask you one question, sir? Do you know what the price of LPG was, a cylinder was, in January of 2014 when the UPA, just a couple of months before the UPA left office? January 2014. Do you know what the price was?
So what, yeah, so you know what was the price in March 2014? Let me 480. So listen, there's a difference.
No, one second. In January 2014,
everybody was entitled. One second, let me complete. No. I know the question, and yeah. I know where, let me complete. I know the answer. I know where you're going to, and I'll answer it. Every Indian could get six cylinders at subsidized rate. So please don't divert the topic.
No, I'm not diverting the topic. I'm not diverting the topic at all. The price, if we can have that graphic here on the wall as well. Sir, please give me 10 seconds.
And tell me how much
the price of LPG per cylinder in January of 2014, just a few months before UPA demitted office, was 1,200 rupees. There you go. 1,241 rupees was what you were paying. No, one second. Just give me 10 seconds. Let me just explain this. Let me just explain this to our viewers.
Okay,
1,241 rupees was what you were paying for one cylinder of gas in January of 2014. Just before elections, just before April, May, it came down to about 750. Remember the fall from 1,200 to 750, just before UPA demitted office. Then the lowest that we've seen in the last 9 years is 584 rupees in December of 2016. Then it's been climbing. There was again in January of 2019. And to be fair, you know, all political parties do this. January 2019, 3 months before the last general election, it was further reduced. From 800 rupees, it came down to 689. So this is not the first time it's happened just before an election. Then it climbed and climbed and climbed from 689 in January 2019 all the way to 1,053. And now it's been reduced by another 200 rupees to 900 rupees. Now, let me ask Bijon Mishra, as a consumer policy expert. Sir, one second. Sir,
there are two other guests also.
Dr. Kumar, please,
Zaka,
with your permission.
can I answer that?
I'll come back to you.
Let me answer it, right?
Bijon Mishra, you know, if I'm a consumer and I'm looking at this graph and I'm saying, ये तो दोनों एक ही काम कर रहे हैं. You know, what difference does it make? When when it was UPA rule, we were paying 1,200 rupees. They reduced it 6 months before the election. Now again, under Mr. Modi's rule, it is 1,100 rupees. He's reducing it 5 months before the election. You need to get your facts in place. No, I'm sorry. No, 1 second, sir. I just elaborately demonstrated to our viewers.
No, you got your facts wrong. It was subsidized.
When I come to you, you can correct me on my facts.
You tell me how many subsidized cylinders are you entitled to? No, one second.
I did not come on the question of number of subsidized cylinders. I was just on the price from January 2014 to where it is today. Now, Bijon Mishra.
Yeah, Zaka, thank you very much. Let me first make a position very clear. I am apolitical. So I am not talking about opposition and the government. I am talking about financial subsidies being managed by the government. You see, this is not a gift from the Prime Minister. Let me first clarify that. It's a gift from the citizens, which is going to the citizens. Let's understand that. You see, we have to understand that every government has to manage their fiscal in such a manner that they are able to reduce their deficit and subsidies. This present government has shown very clearly how to manage the fiscal deficit and also manage in terms of subsidies. You see, Zaka, in your presentation, you completely forgot that how much of subsidy on kerosene we have saved by increasing the number of consumers who have got connected with LPG. You
Okay.
see, let's understand that. Let's also understand how many trees which were being felled before are not being cut nowadays because people are able to use gas for cooking rather than wood. So, you see, what we all have to understand is this price increase or decrease has to be made a little bit transparent. You see, the citizens don't understand because this is a monopoly. Gas is managed by the government.
Yeah.
So the government should come out. There should have been a regulator to regulate all this, to understand and make it transparent to the citizens that when I reduce 200 rupees, where do I get this money from? And if I am increasing 400 rupees, then what am I going to do with this money with that increase?
Yeah.
That transparency is not there in our country. And the opposition neither plays a responsible role in this, nor the government is coming out clearly in terms of bringing out transparency in the pricing mechanism.
So let me ask
And this
Dr.
is what
Santosh Mehrotra, who's also joining us. He's an economist. Dr. Mehrotra, you know, one of the flip sides, and no one talks about this because this is not the popular thing to talk about. This is especially not in election season. Let me come across to that wall, especially not in election season, where, you know, the flip side to what has happened today is the exchequer loses about 7,500 crore rupees. Now, that is what the loss to the exchequer is by today's move. Now, of course, in an election year, you can say these maths don't add up or these maths are not relevant. But the fact is that 7,500 crores is also, coming back to the consumer, because the consumer is the one who has to, the taxpayer is the one who has to bear the burden of fiscal deficit increase.
Good evening, Zaka. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to see you again. Just let me make 2 points here. 7,500 crores is a very, very, very small sum when you when you take into account the fact that the total debt to GDP of this government within the last 5 years has risen from 60 to 65% of GDP to 90%, and it's only just begun to come down to 85. And this is partly driven by increasing subsidies. Now, I have to say, in support of what Bejon said, he's absolutely spot on. We were making a case to the previous government. They should have introduced a relatively low-priced Ujjwala type scheme long ago, precisely for the reason that Bejon was saying. However, we have to keep in mind that in a 9-year period, if the overall debt of the central government rises from 55 lakh crores to 155 lakh crores, then, and the debt to GDP ratio rises, there is a real problem. And why is this happening? Because corporate taxes were reduced, and every year 1.45 lakh crores are being lost by the central government. Personal income taxes were also reduced just in the run-up to the 2019 elections. So these are the foundational reasons, and this is unfortunate. Please remember, you were citing prices. I go back to your graph of January 2014, rupees 1241 was the price. Now, please recall what the dollar price of crude was per barrel. It was in the region of 120. It is today only 80. And so if it was high, it is not so surprising. Fact is, as Dr. Ajoy pointed out, it had been brought down just before the elections. And this government has been a great beneficiary. Its fiscal situation for most of its 7 years was extremely benefited, because from 2015 onwards, soon after that Ujjwala started, the oil prices fell from the peaks of 120, 130 to much below that, to below 50. Please remember. And the windfall gains to the central government were still led to a debt increase from 55 lakhs to 155 lakhs.
Okay.
Why is this happening?
So I think that's a fair point to ask to Zafar Islam. Zafar Islam, I can understand people paying 1,000 rupees for a cylinder when oil prices are above $100. consistently now, despite the war, and I think in the war period, it's at the start of the war, it's sort of just shot up to over $100 a barrel. But after that, it's been coming down, and India has been buying cheap Russian oil for the last for the last over a year now since this war began. Why is the Indian consumer still paying close to 1,000 rupees when oil is only at $80 a barrel? And you are an economist in your own right, Zafar, so you should explain to our viewers.
No, Zaka, I think Mr. Malhotra, who is an economist, must understand that we inherited few problems, very difficult problems when we assumed the power in 2014. So the economy was in bad shape, and when you evaluate economy, and I'm sure Mr. Malhotra will definitely that you look at two things. The macroeconomic parameters at that point in time was terrible, and we had to correct it. So all these additional inflows which we had used to correct the macroeconomic parameters what we needed in the economy, and that's why today your fiscal deficit is in control. Today, that's why growth is there, growth momentum is there, and also this from 5 fragile economy to the best economy in the world. Having said that, we've also ensured that whenever it is required to reduce the prices, cut the excise duty, we have done it. But also there is a question of the state, because at the end of the day, if the pot, whatever the government collects, a large part of that pot goes to the state, government. And then that is important for the state government to also evaluate. When the government is cutting the excise duty, how many Congress government has actually reduced the VAT? Had they reduced the VAT, perhaps the prices have come down. But they didn't reduce the VAT, but they only expect the government of India to reduce the excise duty, but we do it. We will also do it. I'm not saying that we will not do it. We will continue to support the expectation and aspiration what the people of this great country has.
Okay.
But you also have to run the government, you also have to run the country, and you also have to deal with the problem which we have inherited because mismanagement.
Dr. Ajay Kumar, again, fair point that Zafar is making. If you want to bring down petrol prices, you cannot have a situation where, in BJP ruled states, they are bringing down state VAT in many cases by as much as what the central government was bringing down excise duty. I think it was 5 rupees per litre or so. So you have this very piquant situation where in Rajasthan, in Chhattisgarh, other Congress ruled states, the state VAT is not being brought down. And you are, attacking the central government for high fuel prices, but excise duty cut is not being matched by cut in state VAT.
So, but first of all, you need to sack your research guy, because when you put the 1,200 rupees cylinder cost, did you mention it to your viewers that there was nine subsidized cylinders every year available to every people, which was at 410? So it is very funny when you put a data on the same thing. The 9, we should have mentioned it that the UPA government was giving 9 subsidized cylinders at 470 rupees. That would have been the respect. So please sack your research person first. Because when you put up 1,200, you're imagining that the rate is, which majority is buying at 1,200. 9 subsidized cylinders were being given. Actually, 12 subsidized cylinders were being given per year. Please check the data, and if I am correct, then please sack it. Otherwise, please correct me. That's point number 1. Because I want you to officially recognize that the rate 12 subsidized cylinder per year was being given to people, and then you can't equate it with 1,200 rupees. That is the thing. What my colleague from JNU, Professor Saab, said, was absolutely spot on. That is the second. The second issue is
not JNU, sir.
The humongous profit. I mean, I'm glad. One sec. Can I complete, sir? Zafar did not blame Mr. Pandit Nehru. Itself is a great start for a change. Because they'll continuously, the highest poverty reduction. Can I complete, Mr. I didn't interrupt you, Mr.
I know, but what is Pandit Nehru got to do with gas prices?
Why are you so intolerant?
Can I
complete? Because you'll bring, but you didn't bring.
Nobody brought Pandit Nehru, no. So why are you bringing Pandit Nehru into it?
I'm saying, one sec, I'm glad you did. Can I complete? I'm glad you didn't. Hats off to you, because I'm surprised that you didn't bring Pandit Nehru, because you will blame everybody else but Mr. Modi.
Okay. Go on.
Can I complete?
Go on.
So my question is a couple of things. Zaka, so first of all, as far as your researcher goes, please check that information I've given
yeah.
you. So apple to apple is 470 rupees. Yeah. So apology would be acceptable if I'm correct. Otherwise, I'll apologize. Second point. This Prime Minister is like, this government has been increasing it for 20, 30 times and suddenly saying you're giving a gift. Look at that arrogance. They have been sucking the money out of the people, how many lakh crores, and giving corporate benefits. The amount of corporate benefits which they've given, and suddenly your 7,000 crores seems to be so much of a problem. 1,20,000 crores every year have waived off from the corporate tax, and suddenly 7,000 crores seems to be pinching the people of India. This is what this government represents, to continuously extort, extract, and take money from the common poor and the lower middle class and middle class and feed the fat cats.
Dr. Ajoy, one second. No, I think two of you made this point about corporate tax being cut. Would you also care to concurrently see how much tax receipts have come from not just big corporates? I'm not talking about big corporates, even from small and medium enterprises over the last 3 years since this corporate tax cut came into effect. Look at the direct tax collection. Look at the GST collection. Every month we are clocking almost 1.5 lakh crores.
Can you indulge me for 30 seconds?
Okay, 30 seconds.
No, indulge me for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds. 30 seconds. First of all, you are only seeing collection. You're not seeing duty drawback. Please again sack your researcher and see the actual numbers which the government has to put up. Collection of GST minus the GST benefit, value added tax returned to the people is the actual tax collection. You will see a drop. The income tax number of people who are filing have increased. Income tax collection has come down from 3 lakh crores to 2.3 lakh crores. So please again sack your researcher. My question is, all this nonsense they keep telling on the TV and we propagate their lies. The indirect tax collection post GST return, value added tax return, GST, drawback. The exact word is escaping me. Professor Saab will tell it better. Their collection is lower. So my question again is, bad economic management, feeding the fat cats, sucking the poor is the motto of this government.
Okay, Bijan Mishra respond now. Bijan Mishra.
Yeah. Zaka, thank you very much. Zaka, nobody is talking about that these cuts have entailed into increasing the per capita income of our country. The consumers have now more disposable money. I sit in a city called Hyderabad. It is the highest in the country, 3 lakhs per annum. Where were we, 10 years back? You look at the way the people's income has increased. You see, just because the corporates have started paying good salaries to the people, and then again you people, the people who were rich. Please try to understand, 10 years back, 20% of the subsidy used to go to the poor and 80% used to be taken away by the rich. Now it is all going into direct transfer. Now the poor is getting directly into their bank account. There is no kind of an intermediary people playing and pardon me, all those brokers who used to take the money away from the poor.
Okay.
Now it's not gone. 10 years back, we used to see that crowd in the bank who used to grab that money from the poor.
Yeah. So, Dr. Mehrotra, then after that, Zafar Islam, and then Dr. Kumar. Yeah.
So first of all, vaccinations have never been paid for. The universal program of immunization in our country for 45 years has been free. And in fact, for the first time, excuse me, Bejon, I did not interrupt you.
Bejon, sir, please, it was free right from...
Forgive me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, one at a time. Yeah. One at a time. Yeah.
Sirji, we are friends. Huh? Secondly, Zaka, you talked about the fact that taxes have been increasing. You see, the problem with anchors most of the time is they seek about volume, quantity. The fact of the matter is the economy is growing. What you are looking for as an economist is what's happening to the tax to GDP ratio. It is flat. It was 17%. It has not risen. So what has happened as a result of what the way taxes are being structured is that earlier, before 2014, the share of direct taxes, meaning corporate and personal income taxes, was rising, and the share of indirect taxes was falling in the total tax kitty. What you have now is a reversal, which is unequal, because indirect taxes fall on everyone, including the poor. And this is the reason why the PM is even giving this subsidy. But the fact of the matter is that this subsidy is having to be given because inflation rates have gone through the roof and joblessness has increased because the economy is growing much slower. Poverty has increased. Let's just remember that between 2004 and 14, the economy grew at 8% per annum. In the last 9 years, it has grown at 5.7% per annum as a result of that. And please don't give COVID the blame, because COVID was literally a contraction of 1 year. Why did we contract by 6.6% when the global economy contracted by only 3.1%? So, let's look at how economy has been managed, and it's been very poorly managed.
No.
Otherwise, your growth rate would not have been lower.
No. So
Can I
there are
just
a couple,
respond?
there are
I'm not
a couple of things.
JNU,
There are
by
a couple
the
of
way.
things. I'll get Zafar to respond to that as well. It is a fact, and you're right. I'm not disputing that fact that the tax to GDP has remained flat. But I reiterate that direct tax collections have gone up substantially. So have indirect tax collections across the last 9 years. The GDP, we used to be a less than $2 trillion economy 9 years ago. Today, we're a $3.5 trillion economy, possibly a $5 trillion economy in the next 3 years or so. Now, point is that beneficial to everyone? Is the growth unequal? That's a different matter. I'm not getting into that debate at all. But to say that India has not grown manifold,
I'm not saying.
I don't think
Slower.
that's quite accurate, right?
No one is saying it's not grown. Obviously, it's grown.
So let
Let me respond.
let me ask Zafar Islam again. This is the charge that economists like Dr. Mehrotra make against your government, and also the opposition makes against your government. You are only feeding some rich fat cats. You are not worried about the poor and the middle classes.
Not at all. Just examine all our welfare schemes, Rakhi. You will only see all the schemes, all the policy decisions taken by the Prime Minister. We always prioritize this marginalized section of the society, the poorer section of the society. That they should be the first beneficiary of all the decisions taken by the Government of India. Away from that, let me also respond to the Dr. Mehrotra, the economist which has raised. Let me ask him, how is the world GDP is growing? Is it growing or is it contracting? So that is something. How much incremental growth to the global GDP? How much India is contributing to the global GDP? Incremental growth. It is 16-17%. It's likely to go to 20%. If you say that the world economy is not growing, the world GDP is not. All the global large economies are shrinking. India is the only country, despite all the odds, Ukraine crisis, the COVID crisis, everything, still we are growing at a very fast pace. And all the policy decisions and structural reform which has been undertaken eventually benefit us. And now it is we are seeing the benefit of all the decisions which has been taken earlier. So it is unfair for any economist to make this a statement that when we assume the power, it was only merely $2 trillion economy. We were the 5 fragile economy. We were at the 11th position. Today, our position has improved. We are likely to be from number 5th to number 3, and we are just knocking the door to 4th and 5th position.
Okay.
And also, the size of the economy is likely to be $5 trillion. And all the decision which has been taken is now we are reaping the benefit of that.
Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I'll come back to where I started about whether this move was political. Yes, for sure it was, because this was a pain point. I was there on ground in Karnataka for the election campaign, and this was one issue that stood out against the central government, that fuel prices and LPG prices are high. Yes, LPG prices have been cut by 200 rupees. Will the same thing happen with fuel prices? We'll wait and see. But I'm going to this piece of breaking news, which I need to go to urgently. The Chandrayaan 3 rover has now confirmed the presence of sulfur on the lunar surface. Now, this is a huge development. Sulfur has been found near the lunar south pole. The search is currently on to find if there are traces of hydrogen. Remember, ISRO has been saying that the hunt is on for these various minerals which could be found on the lunar surface in frozen form. The surface temperature there could be as low as minus 200 degrees. Some of these minerals could have been frozen for hundreds of years. in that state and at that temperature. So it has found the presence of sulfur. To try and make sense of this, let me go across to my colleague Harish Padhyay, who's joining us on the phone line. Harish, what is the significance of this discovery? The fact that Chandrayaan-3 rover has found traces of sulfur on the lunar surface, what does it mean?
Well, scientists are essentially saying that this in a way indicates that some of the characteristics of the lunar surface pretty much might be similar to the characteristics of some of the soil found on Earth. And also it helps scientists now to find the origin of this part of the lunar surface, on whether it came out of a lava, whether there were other episodes that happened that led to these elements being found there. Remember, it's not just sulfur. Right now, ISRO is saying they've also found aluminium, calcium, iron, chromium, and titanium as well. And the two other elements that ISRO is right now looking at, one obviously is hydrogen. That's something that some of the rovers of NASA, which had gone in the 90s, had found. Second, there are crucial rare earth elements that the scientific world wants to know if it's there, and if we can at any stage in the coming decade or so look at bringing back samples from there. And that's something that perhaps the scientific world would want to know, if there are rare earth elements present on the lunar surface.
And how is all of this information being transmitted back to Mission Control in Bengaluru? Who are the experts who are processing this information, and how do they make sense of how significant this is?
Well, each of these payloads that are on board Chandrayaan-3 have a principal investigator and a co-investigator. Now, this will be investigated by the team which is part of the payload, which is known as the laser-induced breakdown spectroscope. And that is something that is looking at the chemical composition. And the other significant point that one has to point out here is the fact that the instrument used is also developed in-house by ISRO. This is by the Laboratory for Electro-Optic Systems. This is based out of Bengaluru. And that team will now study all the data that's coming in, and also more information that will come in the coming few days till the lunar day gets over. And perhaps that's why ISRO is saying the search for hydrogen is still on, because that would be an indicator that there are elements, there is some bit of an environment that can help any sort of a life. So that's the reason the search is on for hydrogen now.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Harish Padhyay, many thanks for joining us with that big development from the Chandrayaan rover that's probing, the Pragyan rover that is probing the lunar surface. It has detected the presence of sulfur on the moon's surface. Now let's shift focus to some other stories. There seems to be no resolution in sight for the standoff at the line of actual control. China is now continuing its expansionist drive, even through propaganda means. China has now released what it is calling the 2023 edition of its standard maps. Now these maps, interestingly, include the entire state of Arunachal Pradesh, which is Indian territory which China claims, the Aksai Chin region, which of course goes back to the history of the 1962 war, Taiwan, the entire country of Taiwan, and the disputed South China Sea, the entire what they call the 9-dash line. India has repeatedly said that Arunachal Pradesh has always been and will continue to be an integral part of this country. The MEA has reacted very sharply. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has called these maps meaningless, saying that China has no basis to make such claims because the territory is squarely Indian, at least in the case of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, the release of this map comes nearly a week after the Prime Minister met with Xi Jinping at the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, and also, more crucially, just less than 2 weeks before the all-important G20 summit, which India is hosting. So, the big question then remains, is it even possible? Is it even worth the time of both countries for India and China to be engaging in a dialogue, or is it simply an exercise in futility?
बार बार ये प्रवोक करते रहा कि अरुणाचल हमारा है, वो फलाना हमारा, ये हमारा, इससे करके ये बोलते रहता। अभी तक हमारा बॉर्डर के बीच में भारत और चीन के बीच में बहुत वार्ता हुआ था, लेकिन कभी भी हाल नहीं होगा, क्योंकि ये कभी नहीं होगा, क्योंकि चीन और भारत के बीच में कोई बॉर्डर नहीं है। बॉर्डर तब से बनाया जब चीन ने तिब्बत को ऑक्युपाइड किया, कब्जा किया, तब से चीन और भारत का बीच में बॉर्डर बनाया। उसका पहला 1 इंच भी चीन और भारत का बीच में बॉर्डर नहीं पड़ता था।
प्रधानमंत्री ने देखना चाहिए। अभी ब्रिक्स में गए थे तो चाइना के प्रीमियर को मिलकर आए हैं, गले लगाए हैं हमेशा की तरह, और उसके बाद तो चाइना का मैप आता है। तो ये सवाल जो है उनको पूछना चाहिए, आपको कैसा लगता है?
Given the fact that the frontier in the western sector was undemarcated, these myths which the BJP keeps running, that Nehru gave up 38,000 square kilometers to China, is historically absolutely incorrect. Only an intellectually challenged person can make such a obnoxious claim. To sum it up, so therefore the Chinese maps are preposterous. They are not in sync with the history of the Sino-Indian border dispute.
All right, Lieutenant General retired S.L. Narasimhan is DG for the Center for Contemporary China Studies and member of the National Security Advisory Board. Ellen Dolkar is a member of Parliament of the Tibetan Parliament, which is in exile here in India. Professor Victor Gao is Vice President for the Center for China and Globalization and Chair Professor at the Soochow University. General Narasimhan, let me start with you first. How does India make sense of this? Does India even bother responding to this? I believe there's been a strong statement put out by the MEA spokesperson, by the Foreign Minister as well, and I'm given to understand that there was some kind of a démarche issued to the Chinese ambassador here in India as well. Is that the right response? Is that the right course of action?
Thank you very much for getting me on the show. First, let me correct my position because I have relinquished both my appointments recently, and so I am speaking in my individual capacity at this point in time. The issue is that we know that this issue is old. We also know that China has been issuing maps earlier showing incorrect alignment of the border. So this is nothing new. They keep doing this, as our foreign minister said earlier. The other thing that you talked about as to whether the response has to be correct, I think the response has been correct in the sense that the MEA, I'm sure, would have raised an objection on this and raised a protest. That, in any case, will go through the diplomatic channels. But your question of whether we should continue to keep talking, I think we should continue to keep talking, basically because that is the only way out at this point in time. However, to expect a solution very quickly is going to be a little impractical. We need to have our patience. We need to keep pushing our claim. We know exactly where our territories are shown in our map, and that is what we should be looking at, and that is what we should be discussing and pushing for.
So, Victor Gao, even if one were to be charitable, to take the charitable view of why China is doing this, it is one thing to say, okay, there are parts of the line of actual control that are not demarcated, that are disputed, there's a historic legacy, so on and so forth. But please explain to our viewers how China claiming an entire state, an entire province, in your words, the state of Arunachal Pradesh, I mean, how does that even begin or stand to reason? It's like tomorrow India is saying all of the Fujian province belongs to India. I mean, it's preposterous at the very least.
Now, when you talk about what the Indians call Arunachal Pradesh and what the Chinese call the South Tibet region, first of all, China has never recognized the Macmahon line that the British colonists drew up. And that is an illegal line. China will never accept that. So where should be the boundary according to the Chinese perspective? Historically speaking, the totality of Arunachal Pradesh is not India. It is the Chinese territory. It is China's Tibetan territory. That's the reality. That's history. If you go there, for example, on the site visit, the people you see there are not Indian people. The people you see there are Tibetan people who traditionally have been part of China since the 13th century, I would say. And people there believe in Buddhism, as people in Ladakh region That is a
Professor
fact.
Gao,
You can do the survey by yourself.
Professor Gao, I mean, I'm really sorry. The logic of what you're saying is just, it beggars belief. And I'll tell you why. For over 70 years now, there have been elections in Arunachal Pradesh. When the 1962 war happened, there were Arunachal residents, Arunachal soldiers, and ordinary citizens who were fighting against China and for India. Today, you go there and do, by any yardstick, a dipstick survey or whatever you want to have, a referendum. I can assure you that 100% of the population of Arunachal Pradesh will say that they are Indian and they want to be seen as aligned with India. Now, please, pray, explain to me what is the historic basis of suddenly claiming an entire province? There's no rationale there.
Sir, first of all, Chinese position has never changed. China has never recognized Arunachal Pradesh as Indian territory. That's number one. Number two is that there are historical reasons to back this up. Because if you go through the Arunachal history for hundreds of years in the past, you will see this is very much part of the Tibetan territory. And Tibet, since the 13th century, has been part of China. This is the reason. And this is the historical reason. This is on the people-to-people reasons, for example. The fact that India has
by the way, since we are talking historical facts,
doesn't make any sense.
The very first time that China claimed all of Arunachal Pradesh, not the the saying that the McMahon line is not something that they would recognize. That they've been saying for a number of years, a number of decades now. But the very first time that China officially said that they do not recognize it. One second, please. I've been covering MEA and diplomacy for the last 20 years, so I think I know what I'm talking about. The first time that China made this claim of the entire state of Arunachal Pradesh not being Indian and belonging to them was as recently as 2006, 2007. So let's not mix historical facts with positions that China has taken in the recent past. But let me ask Ellen Dolkar, who's a member of Parliament of the Tibetan government in exile here in India. This is, again, they say when you're negotiating with the Chinese, they have this habit of taking a maximalist position. So this you could view as a maximalist position that's being taken. But ultimately, you look at the situation in Ladakh, I think China also realizes that the kind of salami slicing that they are hoping to do or were hoping to do and that they've mastered against other smaller countries, that's not quite working out. That is not quite working out. There is a troop-to-troop situation there. There are 50,000 troops on either side, and neither side is willing to concede an inch. Yes, the standoff has been going on for 3 years, far longer than perhaps what China expected, but it's not like India is relenting. Ellen Dolkar.
Well, let me just clarify that I think it's important to reassert the fact that Xi Jinping's expansionist policy is just an extension of Mao's ambitious integration of the so-called motherland that we've just heard from my co-panelist. So we are looking into this propaganda version of China's history, where they mention the 13th century and the 17th century, since Tibet has been claiming to be part of China. But this is a manipulated history, where if this is the way they want to put it, even China was occupied by the Manchus and they were occupied by the Mongolians. So it's better if they stop their CCP propaganda to claim that Tibet was part of China. This is the same manipulation they're using to claim over Arunachal Pradesh or any part of India. And I think it's important for India to realize that, this was the same claim that led to the illegal occupation of Tibet. And now an attempt to erase the Tibetan identity by Chinese Communist Party. And this is the reality where this systematic and sophisticated program of CCP propaganda is now leading to the expectation of India of somehow resolving this territorial dispute with some sort of diplomatic engagement or peaceful negotiation. Honestly, for me, I feel like, if we really ought to assert the reality, it's important that India really opens up
Allow me to
and
say
assert
one thing.
what is actually India. So, if India actually, look at what is happening today. This so-called standard map had always been claimed by China. It's not a new news. And this is a reality that India must realize, that CCP will continue to do that, especially so under the leadership of Xi Jinping, because this is how they took over Tibet, how they took over the independent Tibet. And they try to do the same thing to not just India, now even Taiwan as well.
Okay. So,
that's why it's
Victor Gao,
important
can you explain? And I think Ellen Dolkar has a point.
Sure that he's
has a point where she's saying
allow me
that,
to say one thing.
She's saying, and please, you have to give us a reasoning for this, that since Xi Jinping came to power, look at the territorial disputes that China has had with Japan, with Vietnam, with Malaysia, with Philippines, with Indonesia, and of course with India. The only common factor seems to be China and the Chinese leadership. And they seem to be having all these problems with these territorial disputes. None of these other countries are having any kind of disputes with each other. The common factor seems to be China. So when the world gets the impression that China is going around instigating trouble, fishing in troubled waters in the South China Sea, East China Sea, and of course fishing or creating trouble in land borders with countries like India, the troublemaker seems to be China, not the other countries.
Allow me to give you my reasoning, okay? One by one. The distinguished panelist just now, the lady, talked about Tibet. Name any country in the world which recognized Tibet as an independent sovereign country. Zero. That's the fact. You need to accept that fact. The Indian government never acknowledges Tibet as a sovereign, independent country. Period.
That's
if
why
you
it's
live in
important
India, you need to
must
abide
wake
by
up.
Indian law. So abide by
This is what
Indian
China has
law
done to Tibet.
and recognize Tibet as part of China. Period. Now, you talked about Taiwan. Taiwan's recent history traced back all the way to the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation, which formed the two pillars for the unconditional surrender of Japan in 1945. This is the fact. Anyone can do some home research and recognize that there is only one China and Taiwan is part of China. That's the fact. That's what the United States acknowledged and
China
accepted.
needs to stop being
That's
a bully.
the United Nations acknowledged and accepted. If anyone wants to challenge that, if anyone wants to say Taiwan is a separate country away from China, he or she is violating the one China policy.
But Mr. Gao, one second, Mr. Gao, yes. There are 23 million people in Taiwan, and I bet you every last penny I have, you have a referendum in Taiwan today and ask them how many of these 23 million people want to go with China, want to reunify with China. I can assure you more than 95%, maybe 99% of the people will say they want to have nothing to do with China. That is the reality that you have to acknowledge. That is the reality that China and the CCP has to acknowledge.
Sir, I'm licensed as a lawyer in the state of New York. Let me teach you one basic thing. Even if 100% of the people in California want to be independent, they will not be able to be independent. Why? Because there is another constitutional process in the United States requiring 3/4 of the 50 other states to approve that. That's the hurdle for any state in the United States to become independent.
Mr. Gao, you're comparing one of the 50 states of the United States with another sovereign independent country which has had nothing to do with you since the founding of the modern day People's Republic of China, since 1949. You cannot compare that with one state of the 50 United States. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that.
Sir,
I'm completely out of time, but General Narasimhan, I'll give you the final word. I have to wrap up in 30 seconds. What this does present to India is a unique challenge because you have this situation where India is clearly moving closer and closer in alignment with the United States, with countries like Japan. It's part of the Quad. And yet at the same time, India also wants to keep a foot in the door with multilateral sort of groupings like BRICS, for example, which just recently concluded their meeting, the G20, part of the SCO. How does India possibly walk this?
Yeah, that is the challenge which the diplomacy of India has actually successfully scaled. You please understand that, while we are also talking to China, we are also we are also part in Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we are part of BRICS, we are also part of Quad, we are also part of Indo-Pacific. So this is the success of Indian diplomacy, which we need to actually acknowledge. That is number one.
Okay.
Number two, the issue now is actually India-China. What Professor Kao said, as you said, China actually started referring to Arunachal Pradesh as Southern Tibet only around 2005-06, as you mentioned, which is correct. Before that, there was no Southern Tibet. I don't know where it has come all of a sudden. That is number one.
Yeah.
Number two, I understand Mr. Ivan Chen, who was the representative of China in the McMahon line in the Shimla Accord talks, actually had signed that map. China backtracked it subsequently is a different issue. So the point that remains is that there was an agreement on McMahon line, which China doesn't acknowledge anymore, which is a fact. In addition to that, you look at the Shanghai Gazetteer map, Shanghai postal maps of 1938. All of them show Aksai as part of India. So this is something which I don't know.
All right.
If you go back and do the research, like Professor Kao said, you will get a different picture.
Okay, I'm completely out of time. I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but I'm totally out of time. Thank you very much, General Narasimhan, Victor Gao, and of course, Ellen Dolkar for joining us. We'll see how this plays out in the run-up to G20. In the meanwhile, thank you very much for tuning in.
Gopal Krishna Agarwal, let me come to you first. In the acceptance that this is a benefit to the sisters, the women of India, is there also not an acceptance by the BJP that this was an issue that was hurting you and the image of the government in controlling prices or just the public mood? I also want to quote what Jairam Ramesh of the Congress party has said. He is saying, "Ye kissa demo kursi ka hai." Karnataka route, LPG price was one of the big reasons for it. There have been two highly successful India meetings and that has you rattled. This is something most of the opposition leaders are saying. And of course, the fact that there are 5 state elections coming up and the general elections are soon after that. So is this move purely because you were feeling the heat?
No, Shivani ji, we have to understand that elections are going to be held next year and some of the state elections are always being held in the country. So it is not that today only our government, Prime Minister has announced this. It is because of the Raksha Bandhan that is coming and the women will be benefited out of this most. That is one thing. And earlier also we have done this. It is not that this is the first time. 200 was the subsidy of 200 rupees for the Ujjawala Yojana connections was also announced earlier. And then before that also last year, the Prime Minister has announced that there will be free gas connections given to the women and almost more than 14 crore people have got this gas connection, women have got gas connection.
But Gopalji, I pointed out earlier that in January 2019 also the prices were brought down to sub 700 level. That seems to be the aim again. So naturally the question will arise that you do this timed to elections.
No, you cannot say if election will be always there in the country, because if you see the 5 years, in the last 5 years, every time there is some election somewhere, even panchayat election is there, local body election is there, state elections are there, by elections are there. So you don't, does the opposition want to say that the government should now for 1 year do not do anything for the welfare of the people? If there is something hurting, the inflation is a concern for us on every point of time. We have done it for the tomatoes, we have done it for the onions, we have done it for other commodities also. So inflation even the RBI is doing full effort to contain inflation. And you see globally inflation is a big worry, but India is at a better place position. It is because our government is actively trying to control inflation and also at the same time coming out with long-term solutions to increase.
Fair enough. Can I bring in the Congress's Mahima Singh? Mahima Singh, what is the problem, if at all, this has been done out of pressure by the opposition because you were raising the issue of price rise and inflation and because you believe that this was hurting the public? The government is saying that we've been responsive all along. Every time the need has arisen, we have taken steps. So what's wrong with it? Why take jibes about this being political? Everything is political.
Jai Hind, steal the goose and give the giblets in arms, or how we say in Hindi, 900 चूहे खा के बिल्ली हज को चली. That is the BJP's story today. Because of course the annual retail inflation is at a 15-month high today at 7.44%. And the food price inflation, Shivani, is at a 3.5 years high, which is at 11.5% today. And the BJP had to do it to save the day. Of course, what you're asking, what the BJP spokesperson is purporting here, that, you know, public welfare should be at the core of the functioning of any government. And so the Rajasthan, which is ruled by the Congress government, has walked the talk. We have been giving cylinders for 500 rupees per cylinder. But here is the BJP. You see, they spread fake news about how the cylinder prices were earlier. And unfortunately, in your report, right in the beginning of the program, you showed how it was 1241 in 2014 before BJP came in. However, let me remind that there was a subsidy. The subsidized cylinder at that point was 414 rupees.
Yes, ma'am, those prices were for non-subsidized. I clarified that. Those prices were for non-subsidized LPG cylinders throughout. So they're comparable.
Every Indian, Shivani, today every Indian wonders where is the subsidy for the past 3-4 years. We are wondering, no subsidies coming back to anybody's accounts. Even for those 10 subsidized cylinders, there is no subsidy at all. Tell me if you are getting it, because I am not. My
I mentioned at the start of my report that the government has provided over 10 crore free Ujjwala refills.
Yeah, Ujjwala story is a different one, and I think you must hold that debate on another day, because when we delve into that, a lot of it's a farce played upon the women of this country. But now you see, you talk about inflation and the BJP, unemployment of course is also linked to it. We remember how the petrol prices were slashed right ahead of the elections earlier, and then, you know, there was this whole drama about that we have slashed the prices, petrol prices or diesel prices, and we saw how Mr. Modi shouted in his rallies and persuaded people when they did not say yes. He said, tell me loudly that they have been slashed. I mean, first you rise it.
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. In about 10 days from now, India will host the G20 summit. Russian President Vladimir Putin has confirmed that he's